I've been driving the overnight route through the Ozarks for long enough that the road feels more familiar to me than my own apartment. My place in Springfield is barely more than a box with a bed in it, but the bus, Route 117, southbound through the ridges and valleys, has become something like a second home. Quiet, predictable, sometimes even comforting. At least, that's what I used to tell myself. People assume the danger of driving a night bus is the people. Drunks, addicts, the kind of folks who mutter to themselves and keep their hands in their pockets. But the truth is more mundane. The real threat comes from the road itself. The steep switchbacks that sneak up on you. The way mist rises from the hollers even on dry nights. The miles where even the radio can't cut through the static. Out here, after midnight, the world shrinks to whatever your headlights touch, and sometimes even that doesn't feel like enough. Tonight started like any other. The depot lights flickered overhead as I walked the length of the bus, tapping each tire with the heel of my boot, checking the undercarriage, the mirrors, the fuel gauge. The bus was one of the older models, the kind that rattles at 40 miles per hour and shakes like it's trying to escape itself at 60. I've driven it so long I can identify passengers by sound alone, luggage bumping the aisle floor, boots scraping the steps, the faint squeak of someone gripping the overhead bar for balance. But the real ritual begins once I step into the driver's seat and look down at the laminated card taped to the dashboard. 9 rules, 9 sentences written in faded black marker, corners curling from age. They were here before I took the job, and the company insists they're legacy guidelines. Not official, not required. But every night driver I've ever known keeps them posted. Most have burned the words into memory. I read them the same way some people read prayers. 1. Never stop between mile marker 42 and 47. 2. If a passenger asks about the old mining town, lie. 3. Do not open the doors after the 3rd bridge. 4. Avoid looking in the rearview mirror after midnight. 5. Do not acknowledge anyone standing in the aisle if the bus is full. 6. Ignore any detour signs after 1 a.m. 7. If you see another bus matching your number, don't signal. 8. Never announce the final stop. 9. If the road feels longer than it should be, trust that feeling. They read like a mix of superstition and paranoia, a folklore carved by drivers who spent too many nights alone in the mountains. But if you ask one of us which rules are most important, we won't give the same answer. Some swear by no mirrors after midnight. Others won't even talk about mile marker 42. Me? I've always paid special attention to Rule 9. If the road feels longer than it should be, trust that feeling. I didn't understand it at first, but I do now. By 10:45 p.m., passengers had boarded, 8 of them tonight. A manageable number. In the front row sat an exhausted nurse, still in scrubs, earbuds in, staring at nothing. Behind her, an older couple who smelled of menthol creams and peppermint candies. A kid with a backpack that looked too heavy for his frame. 2 construction workers who joked loudly until the engine growled to life. An anxious man with a duffel bag he kept hugging to his chest. And finally, seat 8, the man in the gray jacket. He was there before I even boarded. He always was. I never saw him buy a ticket, never saw him leave the bus, never saw him eat, sleep, or speak. But every night, on this route, seat 8 had a shape in it. A man whose face I could describe only vaguely, as though my memory refused to store the details. I tried to meet his eyes as I walked down the aisle during check-in, but he was staring out the window, watching the parking lot like something was about to emerge from it. "Evening," I murmured, though I knew he wouldn't answer. He didn't. He never did. The depot doors slid shut behind my passengers. I fastened my seatbelt, eased the bus into gear, and pulled away from the pool of yellow light into the kind of darkness that feels thicker than night should be. The Ozarks swallowed us whole. Driving this route always feels like entering a different world. The city glow disappears in the rear view, before midnight at least, and the mountains rise like shifting shadows. Houses become sparse. Mailboxes turn into rusted shapes leaning toward the ditches. The forest crowds the road so closely, it's like driving through a tunnel carved from branches. Most of the time, I find peace in the solitude. But tonight, the dark felt heavier, quieter, as if the forest was waiting for something. By 11:20, we reached the first ridge. The bus labored up the incline, engine humming in a steady, familiar rhythm. I checked the dashboard clock. I checked the fuel gauge. I checked the card. My eyes lingered on Rule 1. Never stop between mile marker 42 and 47. We were an hour away from that stretch, but the thought of it always made my stomach tighten. Anyone who's ever driven this route knows why. The road dips there. The fog gathers there. People swear they've seen shapes, figures. Others refuse to elaborate at all. I pressed the accelerator a touch. No part of me wanted to reach that segment any earlier than necessary. A movement caught my eye. Seat 8, the man in the gray jacket. He was sitting forward now, watching me in the overhead mirror, not directly, but angled, as though making sure I saw him without making eye contact. I looked away. Passengers behind him whispered about the cold draft. Someone complained that the windows were rattling harder than usual. I kept my hands firmly on the wheel. Sometimes the bus feels more alive than machinery has any right to be. I've felt vibrations that didn't line up with the road. I've heard clicking sounds from the luggage compartments when nothing was stored inside. Once, I swear, the engine stalled for a full second, but the bus didn't slow down at all. Old machines make noises, I tell myself. But old machines don't keep you moving when the engine dies. We descended into a valley around 11:50. The fog rolled in low, creeping along the ground like something searching. Tree branches reached toward the road, their silhouettes sharp against the beams of the headlights. I checked the rear view again, carefully, quickly, still too early for Rule 4. The passengers looked half asleep, heads leaning against windows, breaths fogging the cold glass. All except one. Seat 8, still watching me, still waiting. We approached the first bridge, a narrow concrete structure that crosses a nameless creek. Local maps don't list it. GPS pretends it doesn't exist. But every driver knows the 3 bridges that cut through the night side of the mountains, because the third one is tied to Rule 3. Do not open the doors after the 3rd bridge. Some drivers claim they heard knocking on their way across. Gentle at first, then harder. I've never heard it myself, but I've heard enough stories to treat the rule like gospel. The first bridge passed without incident. Just the hollow resonance of tires over concrete and the distant drip of water beneath. The second bridge came a few minutes later. As we crossed, I felt the bus shake, not from the bridge seams, but from the aisle, like someone had stood up too quickly. I flicked my eyes to the mirror. Seat 8 was empty. My chest tightened. I scanned the passengers. Everyone else was where they had been, drifting in and out of sleep. The man in the gray jacket was gone. The aisle glowed faintly under the overhead lights, empty from front to back. I slowed the bus, heart thudding. He could not have gotten off. We hadn't stopped. I checked the mirror again, and that's when I saw him, standing at the very back of the bus, facing the rear emergency door, completely still, like a photograph pinned to the world. I blinked. He vanished. Not walked, not slipped between seats, just gone. We rolled toward midnight. I could feel it more than see it. The clock ticked over to 11:57, then 11:58, then 11:59. I felt the weight of Rule 4 pressing at the edges of my vision. Avoid looking in the rearview mirror after midnight. I didn't know what exactly drivers saw if they disobeyed it, but I'd heard the consequences lasted longer than a single night. The road straightened. The fog thinned. The mountains seemed to lean away from the bus. Midnight hit like a held breath. 12 a.m. The mirror darkened, not visually, but in feeling. The air inside the bus cooled. The lights overhead flickered as though the bus itself were warning me. I kept my eyes locked on the road. A passenger somewhere in the back whispered, "Do you see him?" Another hissed, "Don't look, don't look, don't look." My fingers tightened around the wheel, and then, from the very rear of the bus, I heard it. A slow, deliberate footstep, then another, steady, patient, moving up the aisle toward me. I did not look in the mirror. I did not breathe. I kept my eyes on the road and prayed the footsteps would fade. But they didn't. They stopped right behind my seat. Right behind me. And a voice, low and calm and unfamiliar, whispered, "You're early tonight." The voice was close enough that I could feel its breath, except there was no warmth to it. No human warmth, anyway. Just a thin, cool whisper, like air moving through a cave. I swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the yellow lines slipping beneath the headlights. If I turned around, I knew I'd see something I wasn't meant to. Midnight on Route 117 wasn't the time for bravery. It was the time for obedience. The rules existed for a reason. Men better than me had broken them. None stayed on the job long after. The thing behind me didn't breathe. Not loudly, not at all, in fact. Just presence, an unnerving weight in the air, like a storm cloud forming inches from my neck. Passengers stirred in their seats. One whimpered softly. Another pressed a hand against the glass as though expecting something to climb through. Then the bus lurched. Just a small bump, nothing dramatic, but enough to jolt the wheel in my grip. The whispering presence leaned closer. Eyes on the road. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it rattled my ribs. Because that wasn't a warning. It was a reminder. It knew the rules. It enforced them. And it wanted to make sure I followed every single one. The road widened ahead, tall trees bending away from the pavement, as though bowing. The blacktop gleamed under the pale wash of headlights, a slick, almost oily shine. Rain wasn't in the forecast, but here it always felt like the sky had its own agenda. Behind me, a soft shift of weight. Footsteps, barely there. Then another. moving back down the aisle, toward the passengers. A woman gasped. A man muttered a prayer under his breath. The kid with the heavy backpack pulled his feet up onto the seat and squeezed his eyes shut. Whatever walked among us, it was not flesh and bone. Flesh makes noise. Bone knocks. But this thing moved like drifting smoke, soundless, sliding, pressing itself between seats as though it wasn't passing around them, but through them. I kept driving. Every muscle in my body wanted to flee, to abandon the wheel and dive out the window. But the rules were all that still made sense. They were a thin line of sanity stretched across these mountains. The aisle footsteps faded. Seat 8 creaked. I didn't need to look to know the man in the gray jacket had returned. The next 12 minutes crawled like cold syrup. No one spoke, not even the construction workers who had joked earlier. Whatever had crossed the aisle had left them hollow, stunned into a quiet that felt worse than screaming. The road curved left, then right, dipping into a hollow where fog collected in thick, motionless sheets. It looked like a lake made of silver glass. I eased the bus forward. The fog swallowed us whole. Inside the cloud, the world shrank to a few feet of illuminated road. The headlights carved narrow tunnels through the gray, revealing only fragments of the world ahead. A tree trunk, a rusted guardrail, a fleeting glimpse of a road sign half hidden behind vines. Somewhere behind me, the bus sighed, metal settling, or something else shifting its weight. I kept my eyes forward. Checking the mirror after midnight was a death wish, but peripheral vision is harder to control. Out of the corner of my eye, shadows seemed to lean into the aisle, too tall, too thin, like stretched silhouettes of people who were never originally human. My grip tightened. I recognized mile marker 38 as we passed it. 4 miles to go before the place I dreaded most. Fog thickened. Seat 8 creaked again. A voice, his voice now, spoke quietly, barely above the hum of the wheels. "You need to pick up speed." My throat went dry. I hadn't heard him speak in months. The last time, it had saved my life. "I'm not supposed to speed on this stretch," I said, careful not to look at him. "That's not what I said." The bus vibrated, a low, rolling tremor, like something heavy had brushed the undercarriage. The passengers stiffened. The kid whimpered again. "Floor it," the man in gray repeated, his tone calm but urgent. "Do it now." I hesitated only a moment, then pressed the pedal. The bus roared, engine protesting, climbing faster than the grade allowed. The speedometer nudged past the recommended limit. The fog tore around us like we were dragging the night with us. "What's out there?" I whispered. "Not out there," he murmured. "Below." That's when I heard it. A grinding, low scrape from beneath the bus. Something running under the road, or scraping against it, matching our speed. Passengers clutched armrests. The older woman hissed between her teeth. The anxious man with the duffel bag pressed himself flatter against the window. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Then a long drag that vibrated through my teeth. The man in gray spoke again. "Don't stop. Don't slow down. Not until we pass 42. My stomach dropped. Mile marker 42. The beginning of the forbidden stretch. The rule I feared most. Fog thinned, opening into a clearing of pale moonlight. The marker appeared a second later, a weathered green sign leaning at a strange angle, numbers barely visible. Behind it, the road dipped sharply into a shadowed ravine. We crossed the marker, and the scraping stopped. Instinctively, stupidly, I almost looked in the mirror. The bus felt lighter, like something had dropped away. But Rule 4 held my gaze forward. The man in gray lowered his voice. "You should have told them," he said. "Told who what?" He didn't answer, and when I blinked, he was gone again. All that remained was the faint indentation on seat 8 and the cold draft swirling through the aisle. Mile marker 43 appeared. The fog returned, but thinner, quieter, like it didn't want to be noticed. Passengers grew restless. A man in row 3 rubbed his eyes, muttering that he smelled something metallic. The elderly woman beside him whispered that something was walking alongside the bus. I didn't look. Mile marker 44. When I passed it, 3 phones pinged at once. Text notifications. Impossible out here, where there's no signal for 20 miles in any direction. The passengers stared at their screens, then at each other. The nurse in the front row said, "My phone. It's from my husband. He says I just walked in the door." She stared at me, face pale. "I'm on this bus," she whispered. "I'm on this bus." The kid with the backpack shook his head violently. "I got a text too, from my mom. Says I'm asleep in my room." Mile marker 45. Behind me, the luggage compartment rattled. 3 sharp knocks from inside. Passengers jumped. Then one of them, a man in a flannel jacket, called out, "Driver, are you hearing that? There's something back there." I didn't respond. Knocking again, slow, heavy. Whatever was back there wanted out. Mile marker 46. The knocks turned into pounding now, violent and insistent. "Driver," the man in flannel shouted again. "We need to stop. There's someone in the compartment." "No," I said. "No one is in there." "You don't know that." "I do, because Rule 5 wasn't written on the card anymore, but I remembered it from years ago, when the card still had 10 rules instead of 9. Do not open the luggage compartment if you hear knocking. It is not locked from the outside. It is locked from the inside. Mile marker 47. The pounding stopped. Silence settled like dust. We had crossed the entire forbidden stretch. The passengers looked shaken, but alive. I eased my foot off the accelerator, letting the bus settle back into its normal rhythm. My hands trembled on the wheel. The man in the gray jacket still hadn't returned, but his absence felt heavier than his presence ever had. By the time the road straightened, passengers were whispering among themselves, frantic, confused, comparing the impossible messages on their phones. I didn't interfere. The mountains had their own logic, their own rules, and tonight, the road was just getting started with us. As we rolled deeper into the dark belly of the Ozarks, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Something had followed us through mile marker 42. And it wasn't done yet. The strangest thing about passing mile marker 47 is the quiet that follows. It's not the calm kind of quiet, the kind you get on a country road at 3 in the morning, where even the cicadas are too tired to sing. No, this quiet feels wrong, stretched thin, like the world itself is holding its breath, waiting to see who looks back first. We'd made it through the forbidden stretch. I told myself that meant something. I told myself that whatever scraped the underside of the bus, whatever whispered behind my seat, Whatever pounded from inside the luggage compartment had been left behind. But the thing about Route 117 is this: nothing ever stays behind. Not really. The bus hummed along the narrow 2-lane road, engine settling into a steady rhythm again. The fog had thinned, but every now and then a wave of it drifted across the headlights like a slow breath. The mountains pressed closer on both sides, their outlines jagged and unmoving, ancient silhouettes against the moon-washed sky. The passengers tried to pretend things were normal. Humans are good at that. Pretending. One of the construction workers pulled out a bag of chips and ate them too loudly, the crunch echoing through the bus. The older woman dozed with her hands folded neatly over her purse. The kid with the heavy backpack stared at his phone, even though the screen showed no signal in the corner. But every so often, someone would glance toward the luggage compartment. Every so often, someone would check the aisle. And every so often, someone's eyes drifted, carefully, nervously, toward seat 8. It was empty again. Of course it was. Seat 8 is always empty, except when it isn't. I tightened my grip on the wheel. The steering column vibrated beneath my hands, a small tremor, steady and rhythmic. The engine temperature gauge twitched. Not enough to be a mechanical problem, but enough to tell me that the bus felt what we had passed through. The road does that sometimes. It lingers in the machine like memory or warning. The moon ducked behind the ridge, leaving us in a kind of half-darkness where the bus headlights became the only truth. The mist seemed to glide beside us, keeping pace. I could almost imagine shapes forming inside it, faces, fingers, outlines of people who didn't belong. Some nights, imagination is a curse. A soft ping broke the quiet. Someone had gotten another notification on their phone. I don't understand," the nurse whispered. "It says I'm home again. It says I'm asleep." She showed her phone to the woman beside her, who recoiled, muttering a fractured prayer. The anxious man with the duffel bag shifted in his seat. "Maybe it's delayed messages," he said, voice trembling. "Sometimes cell networks. Sometimes they bounce signals." "No," the nurse interrupted, her voice thin but steady. "This message, it's time-stamped 5 minutes ago." A chill spread through the bus. A moment later, the kid with the backpack gasped. "Mine too! Look, look!" He held up the screen. A text message blinked brightly. "Good night. Stop staying up so late studying. I can hear you typing from the living room." "Mom." Even from the driver's seat, I could see the timestamp, 12:04 a.m. We were nowhere near the kid's home. His mother couldn't possibly know what time it was here, couldn't possibly know he was awake, couldn't possibly hear anything from this distance, unless something on this road was listening for her. The older man 2 rows back tried to calm everyone. "Technology glitches," he said gruffly. "It's nothing," but his voice cracked a little, because he'd gotten a message too. I could see the glow of his phone against his face. He just wasn't admitting what it said. The bus dipped into another hollow, darkness pooling thick as ink. Every instinct in my body tightened. The road was changing again. I could feel it. Mile 49, mile 50, the curve at Snake's Bend. My stomach tightened as we approached the next rule, not written on the card anymore, but etched deeply in every night driver's memory. Do not look directly at the roadkill. It is not always dead. The first time I heard that rule, I laughed. It sounded ridiculous, like something a bored driver made up to spook rookies. Then I drove this route alone during a thunderstorm and saw a deer standing in the middle of the road, perfectly still, its eyes reflecting the headlights like mirrors. I honked. It didn't move. I slowed. It didn't breathe. Later, when I passed the third bridge, the deer was standing on the shoulder of the road behind me. I never saw it move. I never heard it. It was just there. Again. That was the night I stopped laughing at the rules. Tonight, as we rounded Snake's Bend, the fog thinned just enough to reveal a shape sprawled across the asphalt ahead. A person, face down, still. I stiffened, hands gripping the wheels so tight they ached. "No," I whispered, "not again." Passengers began murmuring, frightened, confused. "Driver, there's someone. Shouldn't we stop? Oh God, what if they're hurt?" "Stay in your seats," I said, too sharply. "Nobody moves." The anxious man clutched his duffel. "We can't just run someone over." "We aren't stopping," I said, heart pounding. "Not here." The man in flannel swore loudly. "Are you crazy? That's a person." I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. Because the thing on the asphalt moved. Not like a hurt person. Not like anything living. Its arms bent at angles that didn't belong to human joints. Its head lifted too slowly, too smoothly, as though it was floating rather than rising. The passengers fell silent as the figure twisted its neck toward the bus. Even from 30 feet away, I knew it didn't have a face, just darkness where the features should have been. I pressed the horn, hard. The noise shattered the hush inside the bus. The faceless thing did not flinch. It crawled toward us, its limbs bent wrong, its shadow lagged behind. The kid screamed. "Drive!" the nurse cried. "Just drive!" I floored it. The engine roared. The bus lunged forward. The figure blurred in the headlights, its form twisting into a smear of motion. For a split second, I felt something brush the side of the bus, like fingertips dragging along the metal. Then, it vanished into the mist behind us. Passengers erupted in panicked whispers. "Oh God! Oh God! What was that? Are we safe?" No one said the thing I felt deepest. We'd broken another rule, or the road had decided to break it for us. The bus rattled along uneven pavement, the sound vibrating through the floor. Forest branches scraped the windows like skeletal fingers reaching inside. We were not alone anymore. Something had climbed aboard. I felt it in the air. A heaviness, a wrongness. A cold draft that circled the bus slowly, checking each row like a silent ticket collector. Someone sobbed quietly in the dark. The nurse leaned into the aisle. "Driver, what is happening?" I didn't answer, because answering meant telling the truth. That there are rules you follow on this route, but there are also other rules, older ones. Ones that the laminated card doesn't explain. Ones you have to learn the hard way. A soft thump echoed from the back of the bus. Then another, steady, deliberate. The knocking from the luggage compartment had returned, but this time it wasn't asking to be let out. It was moving, traveling forward, row by row. The anxious man clutched his duffel so tightly his knuckles whitened. The old couple huddled together. The kid whispered a rapid prayer under his breath. "Driver," the nurse said again, voice trembling. "Is someone in the back?" I shook my head slowly. "No," I whispered, but I wasn't sure I believed it. The thumping reached the center of the bus. Passengers turned in their seats, eyes wide. The overhead lights flickered, and in the reflection on the front window, not the mirror, but the glass ahead, I saw seat 8 fill itself. A figure, gray jacket, face obscured, eyes fixed forward. He was back, but he wasn't alone. Behind him, in the reflection, a second shape leaned over his shoulder. Something too tall, too narrow, with limbs that didn't match human proportions. I blinked, and the reflection cleared. Seat 8 was still empty, but the thumping reached the final row. A passenger gasped. Someone whispered. It stopped. Silence swelled thick as fog. Then, knock, knock, knock. Right behind my seat. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I stared at the road and whispered the only rule that mattered now. Don't stop, don't stop, don't stop. And for the first time since I started this job, I wasn't sure the road would let me obey. The knocking behind my seat wasn't loud. That was the worst part. Loud noises you can rationalize. Branches hitting the bus, road debris, a loose panel. But quiet knocks, gentle, patient, deliberate. Those are something else entirely. Those are intentional. Knock, knock, knock. It was the rhythm of someone waiting to be acknowledged. Passengers were holding their breath. I could hear their fear in the absence of sound, a collective tightening of lungs. The kid with the backpack slid down in his seat as if trying to disappear. The man in flannel mouthed something that might have been a prayer, though he'd struck me earlier as the type to curse before he'd ever kneel. The bus shuddered, a small tremor running through its length. The wheel jerked under my hands like something had brushed the tires. I steadied it. "Driver," the nurse whispered. "What is that?" I didn't answer. The knocking paused, a heartbeat of silence. Then, thump. Not from behind me this time, from the roof. Passengers gasped. Someone screamed. The lights flickered violently, humming as though the wiring were being shaken loose. The entire bus tilted slightly, not enough to throw anyone, but enough that I felt weight shift to one side. Something was climbing. Feet, if that's what it had, moved along the roof in heavy dragging motions. Not like a person walking, more like something pulling itself forward by elbows and knees, its body scraping over the metal with a deep, resonant groan. Metal strained. The roof dented inward, just an inch, right above row 5. A woman shrieked and ducked. The kid began crying. The man in flannel stood unsteadily. "Driver, pull over. Pull over the damn bus." "No," I said immediately. "Sit down." "What do you mean, no?" he shouted, grabbing the back of a seat for balance as the bus rocked again. "There's something on the roof." His panic was contagious. Fear spread between passengers like fire through dry brush. The anxious man with the duffel bag clutched his head. A couple screamed at each other. Someone frantically tried dialing 911 despite our total lack of signal. For a moment, everything was chaos. And then a calm voice cut through it. Not mine. "Sit down." Seat 8 was filled again. The man in the gray jacket sat perfectly still, looking forward, not at the others, not at me. His voice shouldn't have been audible over the noise, but somehow it cut through everything. precise and sharp as a blade. The man in flannel hesitated. "Sit down," the gray-jacketed man repeated, and he did. The entire bus fell silent, ominously silent. Above us, the creature, or whatever it was, shifted, dragging itself toward the front of the bus. The metal overhead groaned under its weight. Thump, scrap, thump. Passengers huddled together. I forced my eyes to stay on the road. If I looked up, even for a second, the thing might know, might sense recognition, might find a way inside. Rule 4 was about the mirror, not the windshield. But some rules extend themselves. The creature reached the front of the bus. I could hear it breathing, slow, heavy, like dragging air through lungs not made for breathing. A shadow fell across the windshield. No shape, no outline. Just a shifting blot of darkness, too close, too wrong. It peeled itself downward, as though trying to cling to the glass. The nurse whimpered, "Oh God, oh God." Then, whap. A hand, if it was a hand, slammed onto the glass. 5 long fingers, too long, too thin, crooked like broken twigs shoved into flesh. The skin, if that was skin, looked gray and wet, like something pulled from the bottom of a lake. Its fingertips left streaks on the window, as though coated with something oily. The passengers in the front row jerked away in terror. The creature pushed downward, testing the glass with slow, methodical pressure. The windshield bowed inward, just a little, but enough for me to realize it was strong, very strong. My breath hitched. The creature's hand slid along the glass, smearing darkness across it. Something else pressed behind that hand. Another limb, maybe, or the suggestion of a face with no features. The gray-jacketed man lifted his head slightly. His voice was barely audible, directed only at me. "Don't stop. Whatever you do, don't stop." I gripped the wheel harder. The road curved sharply left, the edge of the ravine on one side, jagged rocks on the other. I had no room for error, no room for hesitation. I focused on the yellow lines. The creature slid toward the driver's side window, dragging itself along the glass with a wet scraping sound. The metal paneling groaned as it tried to pull itself lower. I felt its weight, shifting the entire bus. Passengers screamed again. The anxious man with the duffel bag curled into himself, rocking back and forth. The kid sobbed openly. The creature's hand slapped the window just inches from my face. I forced myself not to look directly at it, not to react, just drive, just follow the rules. The creature's fingers curled, scraping lightly as though testing the seams of the glass. Its palm flattened against the window. A crack began forming in the upper corner. My heart dropped. "Stay on the road," the gray-jacketed man murmured again. "Just a few more seconds." The crack spread, branching like spiderweb lines. Then, the creature pushed harder. Glass creaked loudly, bending inward. "Driver!" someone screamed. "It's getting in!" Not yet, not yet, not if I kept moving. The road straightened, the trees thinned, and then, just as suddenly as it had arrived, the creature let go. A wet, sucking sound, as if it peeled itself off the window. A heavy thump on the roof. a dragging scrape toward the back. Then silence. Passengers sat frozen, staring at the windows, at the ceiling, at me. No one dared breathe too loudly. The gray-jacketed man lowered his head again. And I understood. We had survived that encounter not because of luck, but because stopping would have invited it inside. For a minute, maybe longer, the bus rolled through the dark without a sound except the engine. The road felt different now, heavy, like it carried the memory of what had crawled across it. Finally, the nurse whispered shakily, Is it gone?" The gray-jacketed man didn't answer. I didn't either, because the truth was simple. Nothing that touches this route ever truly leaves. The man in flannel wiped sweat from his face. "Where the hell are we? What kind of place is this?" I kept my voice steady. These mountains were old before people came here. Some things never took kindly to being carved with roads. He stared at me. "Is that supposed to help?" "No," I admitted softly. "It's not." The kid wiped his eyes and pointed ahead. "Driver, what's that?" I followed his gaze, and my stomach twisted. Up ahead, illuminated by the high beams, was something towering and wrong. Something standing in the center of the road. Not human, not animal, something else entirely. And painted across its chest, in warped crimson letters that shimmered in the dark, was a number, 117, our route number. My hands tightened around the wheel. Behind me, the gray-jacketed man whispered, "Don't slow down. This is where the rules really begin." I've driven Route 117 for years, but nothing prepares you for the moment. Something blocks the road in the middle of the Ozark Mountains, especially not something that shouldn't exist, that has no business standing upright, that seems to flicker in and out of its own shape like the darkness doesn't know how to hold it together. It stood maybe 8 feet tall. Its limbs were wrong, too long in some places, too short in others, angles bending against nature the way a broken marionette might move if someone kept pulling the strings anyway. The body wasn't flesh, it wasn't fur, it wasn't anything familiar. Instead, its surface was a shifting patchwork of shadows that clung to it like smoke, always moving, never stable. And on its chest, painted as if carved into the darkness itself, was a number, 117. The same as the route I drove every night. The same as the route my father drove before me. The same as the route every vanished driver had taken. Passengers gasped. The kid whimpered again. The nurse recoiled into her seat, clutching her bag like a shield. The man in flannel cursed under his breath, voice trembling despite the defiance. "What the hell is that thing?" He wasn't asking me. He wasn't asking anyone. It was the kind of question you ask the universe and pray it answers with anything but silence. But the universe stayed silent. The thing stepped toward the bus, one slow, dragging foot at a time. The lights flickered as if reacting to its presence, dimming with every foot it gained. The engine rumbled low, close to stalling. I could feel the entire bus tremble beneath me, the vibration of something old, something deep, something that remembered being feared. The gray-jacketed man finally moved. He didn't stand, didn't turn, didn't even look directly at the creature. Instead, he leaned forward just enough that his voice carried to me. Rule 2, he murmured. Lie. My breath went cold. Rule 2, the mining town. Of all the nights to have that rule come into play. I wasn't sure yet how the mining town connected to what stood in the road, but an old memory surfaced. My father sitting in the driver's seat the night before his last run, eyes tight, hands shaking as he held his coffee. You'll hear people ask about that town, he'd said. Don't ever tell them the truth, even if they swear they were born there. I'd laughed back then. I wasn't laughing now. The creature leaned closer, its form bending downward until it was nearly level with the windshield. Its head, if that's what the rounded mass was, tilted slowly, and the shadows around its face churned like a boiling fog. Its hand, or something shaped like a hand, lifted, one long finger dragging a line across the windshield with a sound like nails on ice. Passengers screamed and ducked. Something inside me snapped into clarity. Not courage, not bravery, just survival. I tightened my grip on the wheel, and then I lied. I don't see anything, I said loudly, clearly, forcing the words out through the rising panic. Just fog. Must be the reflection. The creature froze. The nurse stared at me in horror. What, driver? There's something? Fog, I repeated sharply. Just fog. The man in flannel grabbed the seat in front of him. Are you blind? It's right there. Fog, I said again, louder now, forcing the lie into the air. The creature straightened, its head, or lack of one, tilting in a way that made the entire bus lean. I didn't blink. Fog, I said one last time. The shadow creature stepped backward. The moonlight dimmed as it moved, the night bending around it like fabric drawn tight. Then it drifted, not walked, not ran, drifted back into the trees, dissolving into the darkness as if it had never been there at all. For the first time since leaving Springfield, no one on the bus made a sound. The silence was complete. Then the gray-jacketed man spoke again. Keep going. I didn't hesitate. The bus lurched forward. My hands shook, but I kept them firm on the wheel, forcing the vehicle to maintain a steady speed as we passed the spot where the creature had stood. Nothing marked the road where it had been. No footprints, no residue, no shadow. Like the night had swallowed the evidence whole. The stretch beyond mile marker 47 dipped into a valley where the forest opened just enough to reveal the outline of a town that no longer existed. Except tonight, it did. Lights flickered faintly on the horizon. A single street lamp burned, casting a dim orange glow over cracked pavement. The old general store had a lit window, as if someone inside were turning a lantern in slow circles. My breath stalled. The ghost town wasn't supposed to be visible. Not anymore. Not since the mines collapsed in the 1950s, swallowing half the workers and leaving the others too traumatized to ever speak of what they saw underground. The town dried up after that, the remaining families drifting away, leaving behind boarded windows and rusted signs. But tonight, the lights were burning, and passengers noticed too. "Driver, what is that place?" the nurse whispered. The man in flannel pressed his face to the glass. "I thought you said there was no town out here." "I did," I said. My voice sounded too calm for the fear rising in my chest. "Driver," the kid said shakily, "I see people. There are people walking around." My skin crawled. I wanted to tell him not to look. I wanted to tell all of them to keep their eyes forward. because the shapes in the distance weren't people. Not really. They moved like puppets being walked on strings, bodies swaying too loosely, their feet dragging behind them. Their heads were tilted upward, as if they were searching for something in the sky. But the sky was empty, and they weren't searching. They were waiting. The bus slowed inadvertently. I hadn't realized I'd eased up on the pedal. A soft voice spoke behind me. "Don't," the gray-jacketed man said. "Don't make the mistake he made." "Who?" I whispered. But deep down, I already knew. My father. He had driven into that town on his last night. I knew because I'd seen the bus afterward, the way the windshield had cracked inward, the way the seats had been ripped open, the way the radio wires had melted. He survived, but he never took the route again, and he never told me what he saw. I pushed the accelerator gently, guiding the bus forward. The town flickered again, its lights dimming, then brightening like a dying heartbeat. The figures in the street swayed harder. Some turned their heads toward us. Passengers recoiled. "Keep your eyes down," I warned. The nurse bowed her head. The kid squeezed his eyes shut. Even the man in flannel obeyed, though he muttered curses under his breath. But a few passengers looked, and the town reacted. The shapes turned fully, their bodies jerking in unnatural snaps. Their heads twisted too far, necks bending cartilage that wasn't there. Their mouths opened, but no sound came out. Just blackness. A wave of cold rolled across the road, freezing the air so suddenly that frost crawled up the windows in jagged veins. The bus lights flickered, dimmed, held. I pushed the accelerator harder, urging the bus past the town, past the flickering buildings, past the watching shapes. The gray-jacketed man whispered, "Don't speak to them. Don't acknowledge them. Don't remember their faces." The last part wasn't for the passengers. It was for me. I stared straight ahead. The town slid out of view behind us. The lights flickered one last time, then went out. When the bus finally crested the next ridge, the passengers let out a collective sigh, as if they'd been holding their breath for several miles. The nurse leaned forward. "Driver, has that town always been there?" I shook my head. "Not like that." "Then what did we see?" she whispered. I didn't answer. Neither did the gray-jacketed man, but his silence spoke loudly. "You didn't see a dead town. You saw a memory. And memories on this route have teeth." The forest grew dense again, leaves blotting out the sky. The road straightened. The headlights illuminated only the next 30 yards of asphalt. Anything beyond was swallowed by black. We were safe again. Or safe enough. Passengers shifted, murmuring quietly. The kid wiped dried tears from his cheeks. The anxious man clutched his duffel like salvation was tucked inside. Seat 8 was empty again. Of course it was, but his words lingered like a chill in the air. "Don't make the mistake he made." Whoever the gray-jacketed man truly was, whoever he had been before he became whatever he was now, he rode this route longer than any of us, and he knew things drivers weren't meant to know. The bus rolled deeper into the mountains, and I realized something with a slow, creeping dread. The rules weren't just guidelines or warnings or superstitions carved from fear. The rules were alive. They changed. They watched. And tonight, Route 107 had decided to test every one of them. By the time the bus wound its way out of the ghost town's shadow, the passengers had fallen into a kind of uneasy silence, one that felt like a collective truce with fear. No one wanted to speak first. No one wanted to acknowledge what we'd seen. Words make things real, and on Route 117, reality is already thin enough that speaking the wrong truth feels like poking holes in it. The forest swallowed us again, trees leaning close to the road as if listening. The moon was gone. Clouds smothered the sky, thick and low, turning the world into a narrow tunnel, carved by the bus's headlights. I forced myself to breathe evenly, to keep my hands steady on the wheel, to remember the rules. Especially Rule 4. Never look in the rearview mirror after midnight. I've always hated that rule, not just because it's unnatural to ignore your surroundings as a driver, but because every instinct tells you to check. Especially after something crawls across your windshield, especially after a ghost town materializes on a road that shouldn't have room for one, especially after shadows take an interest in you. But I had learned long ago that the mirror wasn't for me anymore. It was for them. The bus climbed toward the second ridge, a long, sloping ascent that felt like rising through layers of cold breath. The engine strained. The lights flickered again, dimming just a little, like something outside the bus was pulling on our electricity. Passengers shifted nervously. The anxious man with the duffel bag leaned into the aisle and whispered to the man in flannel, Do you think it's following us?" The man in flannel stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. "No," he said firmly. "We left it behind." He didn't believe that. No one did. The kid in the third row wiped his fogged-up window with his sleeve and gasped. What are those?" I kept my eyes forward. "What do you see?" the nurse asked. "Shapes," the kid whispered. "Right outside, like walking, but not like regular walking. They're..." "Don't look," I said quietly, without raising my voice. The kid froze. I didn't need to see what he said. I'd glimpsed enough in my years on this route to know the forest walked at night. Not animals, not people. Other things. Things that didn't care about roads or property lines or the thin plea we call civilization. "Driver," the nurse said hesitantly, "should we be worried?" "Yes," I answered honestly, "but staying calm is the only thing that helps." Seat 8 creaked behind me. My pulse spiked. I didn't dare look. The gray-jacketed man had returned, and his presence meant one thing. Something was about to happen. We reached the crest of the second ridge just as the clouds parted for a few seconds, moonlight spilling across the road like silver paint. For a fleeting moment, the forest looked normal. Dead trees, twisted branches, moss clinging to rocks. Nothing moved, nothing watched, nothing wanted. But the relief lasted only a moment, because when the clouds swallowed the moon again, the interior lights flickered, and the mirror above me tilted slightly. I hadn't touched it. No one had. The movement was subtle, so quiet I wouldn't have noticed if the world weren't already so wrong. But I saw it. A small, deliberate nudge, a beckoning angle, inviting me to look. My breath hitched. I kept my eyes locked on the road, not the mirror, never the mirror. A long, quiet moment stretched thin. Then a voice beside me murmured, "Don't." The gray-jacketed man wasn't supposed to speak that close. He'd never left seat 8. But now he leaned into the front row, leaned far enough that I felt his presence right behind my left shoulder. I didn't turn, couldn't. "What's in the mirror?" the nurse whispered shakily. "Nothing," I said. Lying again. I'd done more lying tonight than in my entire career, maybe more than in my entire life. But the rules demanded it, and tonight the rules were in command. The mirror nudged again, another fraction downward, another deliberate invitation. Look, just one look. I knew what happened to drivers who gave in. The company didn't talk about it, but the older drivers did, quietly, reluctantly, always in half-finished sentences. One described seeing passengers who weren't there. Another said he saw himself, but older, bruised, as if beaten. One saw nothing but darkness, and something moving inside it. All of them quit. One never made it back at all. I kept my eyes forward, but the urge to look crept up the back of my neck, an itch in the mind rather than the skin. Behind me, a passenger whimpered. "Driver," the kid whispered shakily. Something's wrong with the mirror." The man in flannel looked up from his seat, then immediately jerked his gaze back down. "Oh God," he breathed, voice cracking. Don't look! Don't!" He covered his eyes with his hands. The nurse clutched her lanyard like a rosary. "What's in the mirror?" she whispered again. The kid's voice trembled. "People." My lungs froze. "What kind of people?" the nurse asked, voice barely audible. "Not," the kid swallowed hard. "Not us." The lights flickered again. I kept my gaze pinned to the road so intensely my eyes watered. The mirror flicked itself lower, metal creaked overhead. A soft tapping sounded on the mirror's edge. Tap, 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 like a fingernail. A cold breath of air rolled through the bus. Seat 8 creaked violently this time. The gray-jacketed man's voice came low, almost growling. "Don't look." Passengers screamed as the bus lights died. For one long second, we were plunged into absolute black. A world without shape. A world without time. Something moved in that darkness, several somethings. The air pressed cold against our skin, like icy hands closing around our shoulders. I felt breath near my ear, not human, slower, hungrier. The mirror hummed, its presence buzzing through the dark. The bus jolted, lights burst back on, and every passenger screamed at once. Because for that single flicker of illumination, the mirror showed the aisle full, packed with people who had not been on the bus. Figures in old-fashioned clothing, wet miners with empty eyes, children whose faces blurred, women in tattered dresses, men whose silhouettes melted at the edges, dozens of them, all standing, all staring, all waiting. The mirror snapped back to its original angle by itself, as if yanked by invisible hands. The aisle was empty again. Passengers sobbed. Someone vomited. A man clutched his chest, wheezing, hyperventilating. The bus lurched forward as I forced the accelerator down. The road blurred beneath us. Seat 8 creaked. The gray-jacketed man had returned to his seat. His voice drifted forward, almost too soft to hear. "That's the old route. What the mirror shows. The one before yours." I swallowed hard. My voice shook when I spoke. "What happened to that route?" Silence. Long, deep silence. Then, it never ended. We drove for several minutes without a word spoken. Not by me, not by the passengers, not even by the forest pressing against the windows. The mirror stayed silent, its surface calm, its angle neutral, as if nothing had happened, as if it hadn't nearly swallowed us whole. The man in flannel broke the silence first. "Driver," he said, voice hoarse, "you need to tell us what's going on." I opened my mouth, closed it again, because I didn't know how to explain a truth I didn't fully understand myself. The forest thinned. The road dipped toward the third bridge. A cold realization washed through me. Bridge number 3. Rule 3. Do not open the doors after the third bridge. The nurse shifted uneasily. "Driver, why are you slowing down?" I hadn't realized I was. The gray-jacketed man finally leaned forward again. His voice dropped to a whisper that crawled down my spine like ice. "Because they're already waiting." I stared ahead and saw them. Shadowy figures standing on the far end of the third bridge. Dozens of them, silent, facing us, waiting for the doors to open. I tightened my grip on the wheel. "Driver," the kid whispered, "what do we do?" I took a slow, steady breath, then said the only thing that ever mattered on Route 117. "We follow the rules." Most of the time, the third bridge looks like nothing. Just another narrow stretch of concrete laid over a low gully the maps don't bother naming. You cross it in under 10 seconds and never think about it again. In the daylight, it's almost scenic. But at night, on this route, under a sky that feels too close and too heavy, it becomes something else entirely. Tonight, as we crested the bridge emerged from the darkness like a long, pale rib bone. The air around it shimmered faintly, as if heat rose from it, even though the night had grown cold enough for frost to cling to the edges of the windshield. And they were waiting. I didn't know what to call them. People was too generous, ghosts too polite, creatures too simple. They were shapes, human-shaped, but not human-behaving. Their bodies stood too still. Their arms hung too straight. Their heads tilted at dislocated angles that no neck could survive. They stood in 2 long rows on either side of the far end of the bridge, forming a corridor we'd have to drive through if we wanted to continue the route. Passengers gasped when they saw the figures. The nurse pressed both hands to her mouth. The kid ducked low in his seat. The anxious man tightened his grip on his duffel so hard the canvas strained. "Driver," he whispered, "can we turn around? Please tell me we can turn around." "No," the gray-jacketed man said quietly from seat 8. He didn't say it sharply, didn't bark or snap. He simply stated it like truth, unchangeable, inevitable. "We can't turn around." The kid looked back at the stretch of road behind us, swallowed hard, and whispered, "What's behind us?" The gray-jacketed man didn't answer, and that silence was answer enough. The bus slowed as we approached the bridge, not because I wanted it to, but because the engine lost some of its strength, shuddering as if the air itself were too thick to breathe. The headlights flickered again, glancing off the figures ahead. They didn't move, they didn't flinch, but they knew we were coming. The man in flannel stood abruptly. "Nope. No, I'm not driving through that. Driver, you stop this thing, right?" "Sit," the gray-jacketed man murmured. The flannel man froze. The word wasn't loud, but it was absolute. Something about the gray-jacketed man's voice compelled obedience, like the rules themselves spoke through him. The passengers felt it too. I could see it in their bodies, the way their shoulders stiffened and their breaths hesitated. He wasn't just warning us, he was controlling the situation and maybe protecting us, or maybe steering us. I still wasn't sure which. The front wheels touched the beginning of the bridge, and a cold ripple passed through the bus, so sharp and sudden I thought a window had shattered. The nurse cried out. The kid clutched the armrest so hard his knuckles whitened. I kept both hands on the wheel and eased forward. 10 miles per hour. 8, 7. The engine whined softly, like something pressed against its throat. The figures ahead loomed larger in the headlights. Their faces, if they were faces, were smooth and blank, pale like unformed clay. Their clothing didn't belong to any single decade. Old dresses, patched miners' coveralls, faded flannel, coats from another era entirely. They seemed assembled from memory rather than reality. As we drew closer, a low sound rolled across the bridge, like wind through a hollow tunnel. But the trees were still. The night air was dead. The sound came from them. A whisper, a single, unified whisper. Open. Passengers recoiled violently. No, the gray-jacketed man said sharply, louder this time. The whispering cut off instantly. The kid whimpered. What do they want? The gray-jacketed man leaned forward, his face still hidden in shadow. The doors. Rule 3. Do not open the doors after the third bridge. I pressed the accelerator gently, but the bus crawled as if pushing through invisible weights. The figures watched us closely as we approached. Their bodies swayed faintly, not in time with wind, but in time with us, mirroring the movement of the bus like reflections waiting for the original to fail. One figure stepped closer to the edge of the bridge. Its head snapped to the side, then back, then tilted upside down, without the rest of the body moving. Passengers erupted in terrified cries. Jesus Christ! Oh God! Driver! Drive! Please, please, get us out of here, the gray-jacketed man whispered. Just a little farther. His voice held no fear, no excitement, just patient inevitability. The bus rolled forward. The first figure reached out a hand, long fingers stretching as if made of softened wax. The tips brushed the window nearest the kid. Frost exploded across the glass. The kid screamed. Don't let them in! I won't, I said, though my own voice shook. Another figure pressed a hand against the bus, then another and another. Pale prints smeared across the windows. They pushed lightly at first, then harder, as though testing the strength of the steel. The gray-jacketed man leaned closer, eyes fixed forward. They only want one thing. What? The nurse whispered. His voice thinned into something almost mournful. Company. A jolt struck the side of the bus. Wham! Passengers shrieked. The entire vehicle rocked. One of the figures had slammed itself against the side. Hard. Its head snapped backward from the impact, but with a sickening crack, it twisted itself upright again. No delay, no recovery, just movement like time had been edited out. They were no longer just waiting. They were testing. Then the whisper returned, louder, more insistent. Open, open, open. The doors vibrated. The handle rattled. The lock clicked. Passengers screamed as the door mechanism jerked, fighting against itself. The neon green light above the exit flickered. and for a heartbeat, I saw the door control switch lift on its own. "No," the gray-jacketed man hissed. He stood. The first time I'd ever seen him stand. His posture was wrong, too slow, too careful, like he had to remember how to move bones he no longer owned. He walked down the aisle and every step dimmed the overhead lights, as if the bus strained to hold his weight. He reached the front and placed his hand over the door release lever. Instantly, the rattling stopped. The whisper outside faded to a whimper. The figures pulled back, not retreating, but recoiling, like animals recognizing a predator. The bus crept forward inch by inch, and when the headlights finally passed the last figure, crossing the far end of the bridge, the oppressive cold lifted. The moment the rear wheels left the concrete, the whisper ceased completely. The figures vanished, not walked away, not dissolved, just blinked out of existence. The gray-jacketed man removed his hand from the lever, turned, and walked slowly back to seat 8. He sat. Passengers panted, sobbed, held each other. The kid clung to the nurse's sleeve. The anxious man covered his face with both hands. I gripped the wheel, knuckles pale. Finally, I managed, Why did they stop when you stood up?" The gray-jacketed man looked straight ahead. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than ever. "Because I used to drive this route." A ripple of shock passed through the passengers. I swallowed hard. "When?" "Before the collapse," he said. Cold crawled through my chest. "The mining town?" I whispered. He didn't answer, but I already knew. He had been a driver before the town died, before the road changed, before the rules were rewritten and half of what lived here was buried alive. A long silence filled the bus. Then he added, like a confession he didn't want to give, "I didn't follow the rules." The kid whimpered. The nurse whispered a prayer. The man in flannel stared at him with open terror. "What happens," I asked softly, "if you break them?" He looked at me through the reflection in the darkened window, eyes older than anything human had a right to be. "You don't get to leave." The bus rolled deeper into the mountains. Passengers watched him with a mixture of awe and dread, and I knew. Chapter 2 had been about surviving the road. Chapter 3 had been about surviving the town. Chapter 4 had been about surviving the mirror. Chapter 5, it was about the man sitting in seat 8, and the terrible truth that he'd never truly left this route. The mountains changed after the third bridge. They always did, but tonight the change felt immediate, deliberate, as if something had taken a deep breath when we crossed that threshold, and the world rearranged itself around us. The road seemed to tighten, its edges curving inward like a narrowing throat. The forest crowded closer, branches bent unnaturally low, casting long, finger-like shadows across the pavement. No one on the bus spoke for several minutes. We were too afraid of hearing something answer back. The gray-jacketed man sat motionless again in seat 8, shoulders squared, head forward, like a sentinel watching for threats only he could see. The rest of the passengers watched him more than the road now. I could feel their stares in the mirror, even though I refused to look into it. The nurse broke the silence first. "Driver," she whispered, "are the figures, are they gone?" "For now," I said. It wasn't reassurance. It was fact. And everyone felt the weight in the words. For now. The kid curled sideways in his seat, knees pulled to his chest. "I want to go home," he murmured. "I know," I said softly. "We're moving toward Gainesville. We'll reach it." The gray-jacketed man's voice drifted low. "If the road lets you." Passengers stiffened. The man in flannel turned around sharply. "What the hell does that mean?" "It means we keep going," the gray-jacketed man said without emotion. "Eyes forward. Don't think too hard about what's behind us." No one dared ask what exactly was behind us. The forest thinned. The road opened into a wide S-curve locals call the Sickle, named because it swoops like a blade through the mountainside. I'd driven it hundreds of times, could do it half asleep. But tonight, the turn felt wrong. Too sharp, too tight, too much like a trap. I slowed the bus, leaning into the curve. Headlights spilled across the tall pines, carving the darkness into slashes of pale light. The far end of the bend should have revealed open highway. Instead, it revealed the same stretch of road we'd just driven, the same pattern of bare branches, the same leaning pine scarred with the same lightning strike, the same shredded billboard reading "Do not trespass." Quarry closed. A ripple of cold crept through me. No, 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 no. We were looping. Passengers noticed immediately. The anxious man gasped. "Driver, did we turn around?" "No," I said, heart hammering. "We didn't." "But that's the same sign," the man in flannel snapped. "The same billboard. That's impossible." The kid's voice cracked. We're stuck, aren't we?" The nurse shook her head violently. "Don't say that, don't say that." The gray-jacketed man leaned forward, just slightly. "The loop has started." A cold ache spread across my chest. I knew about the loop. Every night driver did. Some stretches of the route bend more than geography should allow. A hill will repeat itself. A gas station will appear twice. A curve will take you back to where you started. Most drivers only see the loop once or twice in their careers. And you never, ever talk about it. The road doesn't like being acknowledged. I tightened my grip on the wheel. "How many times?" I whispered, mostly to myself. The gray-jacketed man answered anyway. "Depends on how many are watching." I didn't want to know who they were. The bus rolled forward, slowly, cautiously. We passed the same trees, the same rock jutting into the ditch, the same posted signs. The road dipped into a small valley, and then there it was. The same curve rising before us a third time. Passengers cried out in despair. The kid covered his ears. The nurse pressed her head against the seat in front of her, as if trying to wake from a dream. The man in flannel slammed his fist against the window. "This isn't real. This can't be real." "It is," the gray-jacketed man murmured. His voice didn't carry comfort, just confirmation. I pressed the pedal harder. The bus growled, pushing up the incline in a long, shaky climb. My eyes strained to find any change, any break in the pattern. But the trees looked identical. The shadows fell in the exact same places. The road curved like a duplicated memory. We were trapped in the loop. The fourth time around, something changed. As we approached the familiar pine scarred by lightning, I noticed someone standing beside it. A man, in a bus driver's uniform, facing away from us, staring into the darkness. My stomach turned over. "No," I whispered. Passengers stiffened. "Who is that?" the nurse whispered. But I knew. Even before the gray-jacketed man spoke, I knew. "That's the one who drove before you." My father, or what remained of him. The silhouette was exact. That broad frame, the slight hitch in his posture, the cap pulled low. But something was off. His head tilted too far to the left. His arms hung too stiffly. His clothes fluttered with a wind that didn't exist. I slowed the bus instinctively. The gray-jacketed man tensed. "Don't stop." I eased back onto the gas, heart punching my ribs. The figure didn't turn, didn't move, didn't blink. Just stood in the loop, forever stuck on a stretch of road that never ended. When we passed, the kid whispered, Was that real?" The gray-jacketed man's voice cut through the rising panic. He broke Rule 9. Passengers looked at the laminated list taped above me, confused. Rule 9. If the road feels longer than it should be, trust that feeling. He thought it was a trick, the gray-jacketed man said softly. So he ignored it, and the road kept him. I swallowed hard. The loop wasn't just a glitch in the world. It was a choice point. Follow the instinct or be consumed. We approached the curve for the 5th time. Everyone held their breath. The road ahead looked exactly the same as all the others, except for one difference. The pine tree was gone. In its place stood a narrow gravel turnout, one I had never seen before, with a hand-painted sign, Bus 1117, Exit. Passengers gasped. "Is this it?" the nurse whispered. "Are we getting out?" The man in flannel shook his head violently. "That wasn't there earlier. That's not real. We shouldn't..." The gray-jacketed man interrupted. "This is the exit, but only if you keep driving forward." The anxious man clutched his duffel tighter. "What happens if we turn?" The gray-jacketed man didn't answer, but I knew. We joined the silhouettes in the loop. I pressed the accelerator, breath thin and shaking. The bus surged forward onto the new stretch of road. Passengers cheered nervous, some crying outright in relief. The loop didn't appear again. The road widened, trees pulling back like a deep exhale. Finally, the route opened toward the familiar stretch leading toward Gainesville. I let out a long, shuddering breath, but the relief didn't last. The gray-jacketed man leaned forward just enough for me to hear him clearly. "They let us out, but they're not done with us." "Who?" I whispered. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't turn, just answered in the calmest, coldest voice I'd ever heard. "Everything you saw on that road." The bus rolled into the next valley, and I knew. The loop had only been a warning. What came next would be the real test. Midnight comes only once on a clock, but on Route 117, it arrives in layers, like peeling through versions of the same moment until the road decides which one it wants to keep. After the loop spat us out, I kept checking the dashboard clock, even though I knew better. It hadn't moved in 7 minutes. The second hand twitched in place like it was trying to decide whether time should continue. The passengers didn't notice, or maybe they were too afraid to look. Maybe that was mercy. The mountains leveled into a wide stretch of road flanked by tall pines. the kind that rise like pillars in an abandoned cathedral. The wind had died completely, leaving the forest exhaling only silence. The bus headlights carved the world into narrow beams of light, and everything outside that beam felt like it crouched in wait. For the first time in over an hour, I felt a small flicker of relief. We were through the loop. We had survived the bridge. The ghost town was behind us, but the gray-jacketed man had been right. They weren't done, not even close. The kid had fallen asleep against the nurse's shoulder, exhaustion finally pulling him under. The anxious man with the duffel held it in his lap like a life vest, whispering inaudible words to himself. The man in flannel stared out the window, jaw clenched, as if trying to memorize the forest in case it changed again. Seat 8 was occupied, but the gray-jacketed man hadn't moved since the loop ended. For a while, he was as still as a statue, no breathing, no shifting, no weight pressing into the cushion. Sometimes I thought he wasn't sitting on the bus. Sometimes I thought he was anchored to it. I kept my eyes forward. Forward was the only direction that mattered. Then, without warning, the bus lights flickered once, twice, and died. Everything plunged into darkness, total smothering blackout. Gasps erupted. Someone screamed. The bus continued moving, but the world was swallowed whole. I didn't dare reach for the overhead lights. On this route, darkness isn't absence, it's invitation. I kept the wheel straight and waited, counting the seconds by feel. 1, 2, 3. The lights surged back on with a hum, and someone was sitting in the front row. Seat 1, a seat that had been empty moments ago. My hands tightened on the wheel. I hadn't heard the door. I hadn't heard footsteps. I hadn't heard anything. But somehow, a man now sat directly behind the white line, hands folded neatly in his lap. He wore a dark suit, old-fashioned and perfectly pressed, as if he'd stepped out of a portrait. His skin was pale, not corpse pale, not sickly pale. Paper pale, like he'd been drawn into existence or erased from it. He didn't face me, didn't turn. He simply stared at the opposite window, motionless. Passengers recoiled. "Driver," the nurse whispered, barely audible. Someone just got on." "No, they didn't," the gray-jacketed man murmured. The new arrival tilted his head slightly, not toward the window, but toward the gray-jacketed man's voice. "So, you remember me," the man in the suit said softly. His voice was smooth, quiet, and wrong in that it carried no emotion. Not calmness, not anger, not warmth, just nothing. The gray-jacketed man didn't move, didn't blink. "Why are you here?" he asked. "To collect something," the suited man answered. He slowly turned his head toward me. His eyes were dark, too dark. They felt like the spaces under the bed of a childhood nightmare, depthless, patient, waiting. "I've been looking for you," he said. The words didn't land like a threat. They landed like a statement of fact, heavy, inevitable, final. Every instinct in my body screamed to keep my eyes on the road, but his gaze held mine, and for a moment, just a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The gray-jacketed man stood abruptly. "Look at me," he said. His voice was sharper now, not a suggestion, but a command. His presence filled the bus like a cold wind. The suited man turned his head toward him. "You had your chance," the suited man murmured. "You broke your contract." Passengers looked between them, wide-eyed, terrified, caught between two forces they could not understand. What is he talking about?" the man in flannel whispered. The gray-jacketed man ignored him. He stepped into the aisle and stood between me and the suited man, blocking the line of sight. "Driver," he said quietly, "keep going." My mouth was dry. "Who is he?" The gray-jacketed man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared down the suited man as if this encounter had happened before, many times, always ending the same way. Finally, he said, "He's the reason new drivers are given rules." A silence colder than the mountain air filled the bus. The suited man smiled faintly. "Not rules," he corrected. "Warnings." The lights flickered again. The bus wavered slightly as the engine hiccuped. The kid jolted awake, clutching the nurse's arm as he looked wildly around. The suited man continued, "The first rule was written because of me." Passengers stared. The nurse trembled. What rule?" The suited man's eyes flicked toward me. "The rule about stopping." My blood ran cold. Rule 1. Never stop between mile marker 42 and 47. Not for anything. Not for anyone. Not even for someone who looked real. The suited man leaned back in seat 1, folding his hands elegantly. "You slowed down tonight," he said softly. "You felt me watching." My breath caught. "You nearly stopped." He let the words hang in the air. I accepted that as an invitation. The gray-jacketed man stepped forward. "Leave him alone." "I'm not speaking to you," the suited man said sharply, and the air inside the bus trembled with the weight of his voice. The gray-jacketed man stiffened. The suited man looked back at me. "There is still something you owe," passengers murmured in fear. Someone cried softly. The anxious man clutched the duffel bag like it contained his heartbeat. "What does he owe?" the kid asked shakily. The suited man's gaze softened, almost kindly. "A truth," he said, "something he left behind." Then he looked directly into the aisle camera, straight into the lens, and for a heartbeat, the bus monitors crackled to life on their own. Static, distortion, and then my father, sitting in the driver's seat of this same bus, worn, afraid, looking directly into the camera. "Son," he said softly, "if you see him, don't." The footage cut. The monitors went black. A hush fell over the bus so complete, it felt like stepping into a dream mid-sentence. The suited man waited, expectant. The gray-jacketed man stepped between us again, voice cold and hard. "He doesn't owe you anything. He didn't make the deal. He inherited it," the suited man said quietly. "Just as you did." My stomach twisted. The bus creaked as the road leveled into a quiet valley. The suited man stood, slowly, gracefully, like a shadow rising from another shadow. "I will return when the road wishes it," he said. "You know this." He looked at me one last time. "You're almost ready." Then the lights flickered, and he was gone. Just gone. Seat 1 was empty. The air was warmer. The shadows pulled back. Passengers sobbed in relief. But I didn't. Because the gray-jacketed man turned toward me, expression bleak and hollow, and said, He's coming back at the final stop. The bus rolled on into the dark valley, and I finally understood. The midnight passenger wasn't here to haunt us. He was here to collect a debt. The road to Gainesville is usually the easiest part of the route, a long, quiet glide through a valley where the mountains flatten and the moon reappears. Tonight, the moon didn't come back. The sky stayed a bruised, empty, black, starless, and thick, as if something vast pressed against it from the other side. Passengers whispered softly, voices cracked by exhaustion and fear. The kid spoke in broken sentences. The nurse held his hand. The anxious man murmured prayers into his duffel. Even the man in flannel had gone quiet, too shaken to shout anymore. Seat 8 held the gray-jacketed man, who stared out the window like he was memorizing the darkness. And for the first time since the boy had fallen asleep, I allowed myself a fragile thought. We might make it. Route 117 had thrown everything at us. The figures at the bridge, the loop, the ghost town, the things that scraped the roof, the midnight passenger and whatever contract he believed I'd inherited. But we were still moving, still alive. The engine hummed steadily. The headlights stayed bright. The road didn't twist into wrong shapes. For a moment, just a moment, the world felt stable again. Until the sign appeared. A road sign I had never seen before. Old, rusted, leaning at a dangerous angle. It read, "Final stop, 1 mile." I hit the brakes, just slightly, just enough to jolt the bus. Passengers gasped. "Driver," the nurse whispered, "what's happening?" The gray-jacketed man stood, slowly, painfully. He made his way down the aisle, each footstep dimming the lights as he passed, until he reached the yellow line behind me. His voice was soft, almost kind. "Do not stop the bus." I swallowed hard. "There's no sign like that on this route." "There wasn't," he said. "Now there is." "What does it mean?" He didn't answer for a long moment. Finally, he exhaled a brittle whisper. "It means he's coming." The midnight passenger, the man in the suit, the one who'd been waiting for a debt I didn't know existed. My throat tightened. I don't owe him anything. "Everyone on this road owes him something," the gray-jacketed man said, "including me." His expression softened, or maybe broke. "I tried to warn your father," he said quietly. "He didn't listen." Passengers stiffened. They didn't breathe. They barely blinked. "What happened to him?" I whispered. The gray-jacketed man lowered his head. He mistook the final stop for a destination. The bus coasted forward on its own, the engine too, quiet, as though the road had taken control. The sign grew smaller behind us. Ahead, the valley deepened into a place I didn't recognize. Not the usual path to Gainesville. Not any map I'd studied. Not any world I'd known. The road narrowed, then widened unnaturally, then narrowed again, like breathing. The kid whimpered. "Driver, are we almost there?" I wanted to lie, but I didn't know what there was anymore. The gray-jacketed man placed a hand on the seatback beside me. "Listen carefully," he said. "The rules are ending. What comes next is choice." "What choice?" He didn't answer. Not yet. The road straightened into a long, impossibly flat stretch. No trees, no mountains, no sky. Just a void overhead, the headlights cutting a thin line through a blackness too still to be night. Then I saw the station, small, old, abandoned, a single wooden platform, a single flickering lantern, a sign with peeling paint. Gainesville, final stop. Passengers murmured in confusion. "This isn't Gainesville," the man in flannel said. "This isn't anything." The bus slowed, not because I pressed the brake, but because the road wanted it. The headlights dimmed as if bowing. The engine rumbled low and reverent. The platform grew closer, 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 and then the bus stopped, all by itself. Passengers froze. I reached for the ignition. It didn't respond. I reached for the shifter. Locked. My heart pounded. The gray-jacketed man placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's time," he said. "For what?" He nodded toward the platform, and my breath died in my chest. The midnight passenger stood beneath the lantern, waiting. Same pressed suit, same paper-pale skin, same empty eyes. He didn't need to board this time. We had come to him. Passengers began crying. "No," the nurse whispered. "No, no, no." The anxious man clutched his duffel so hard it tore. The kid pressed his hands over his ears. The man in flannel shouted, "Driver, lock the doors!" "They're locked," I said, voice shaking. "They've been locked." The suited man lifted a single hand. The bus doors clicked. Not open, just unlocked. The gray-jacketed man stepped into the aisle. "This is where I leave you." The word struck me harder than anything tonight. "What do you mean?" He looked at me with eyes that held decades of regret. "I should have stayed on the bus," he said. "That was the final rule." Passengers stared in disbelief. "I got off," he said softly, "and the road kept me. That's why I never left seat 8. He managed a small, sad smile. "You drove well, better than most, better than me." My throat tightened painfully. "I can't do this," I whispered. "I don't know what he wants." "Yes, you do." He gestured toward the midnight passenger. "He wants an answer." The suited man stepped forward, lantern light casting a long, thin shadow behind him. "Driver," he said gently, "you know why I'm here." The lantern flickered, and for a moment, he wasn't the midnight passenger. He was my father, older, tired, eyes full of apology. "Son," he said softly, "finish what I couldn't." Then the illusion faded. The suited man held out his hand. "Will you?" he asked. Passengers sobbed. The nurse shook her head violently. The kid whispered, "Please don't go out there." But the gray-jacketed man placed a hand on my back. "Remember the last rule." My heart pounded. What rule? His voice was barely a breath. "If you finish the route, don't get off the bus." The suited man stepped closer. "Choose." His hand hovered inches from mine. The passengers' cries dimmed. The lantern flickered again. The road waited. My father's voice echoed faintly. "Don't." I took a slow, trembling breath, and I said, "No." The suited man's expression didn't change. He simply lowered his hand. The lantern extinguished. The station dissolved into darkness. The road groaned beneath the bus, like a sigh of disappointment. And then, the headlights flared bright. The engine roared. The world snapped back into place. We were moving through the mountains, toward Gainesville, toward morning. Passengers gasped in relief. The kid cried quietly. The nurse hugged him. The anxious man whispered thank yous into the air. Even the man in flannel slumped into his seat, shaking. I looked at seat 8. Empty. Truly empty. For the first time in years. The gray-jacketed man was gone. Not vanished. Released. The mountains parted. A sunrise bled pale gold across the horizon. Gainesville appeared like a promise. I kept my hand steady on the wheel, and as the first rays of morning touched the bus, I whispered the truth I finally understood. The rules keep you alive, but the choices make you human, and tonight I had chosen to keep going.